What if all ice on Earth melted instantly? There's about 24 million cubic kilometers of ice on Earth. Most of it is locked up in the Antarctic ice sheet, with smaller amounts in Greenland, mountain glaciers, and sea ice. If all of it melted instantly, we'd have some problems. First, let's talk about what we mean by instantly. For our purposes, instant means the ice turns to water in, let's say, 1 second. Not because of heat, just magic ice melting powers. Because if we melted it with heat, we'd have much bigger problems than flooding. The first thing you'd notice is that sea levels would rise by about 70 meters. That's roughly 230 feet. For reference, the Statue of Liberty from ground to torch is 93 meters tall, so we're talking about water coming up to about her waist. This would put most of Florida completely underwater. New York City? Gone. London? Submerged. About 40% of the world's population lives within 100 kilometers of a coast, so we're looking at the displacement of roughly 3 billion people. But the flooding isn't even the worst part. When you instantly convert 24 million cubic kilometers of ice into water, you're releasing an enormous amount of stored coldness into the ocean. The average temperature of Antarctic ice is around minus 30 degrees Celsius. The ocean is around 4 degrees Celsius on average. When you dump that much cold water into the ocean all at once, you'd create the most catastrophic weather event in human history. The temperature difference would generate storms that make every hurricane we've ever recorded look like a light breeze. The atmospheric circulation patterns that drive our weather would completely break down. The Gulf Stream, which keeps Europe warm, would probably shut down entirely. And here's where things get really weird. All that ice melting means all that weight is suddenly removed from the Antarctic and Greenland landmasses. These continents have been compressed under the weight of ice for millions of years. Remove that weight instantly, and the crust would start to rebound upward, a process called post-glacial rebound. Normally, this happens over thousands of years, but in our scenario, the sudden release of pressure would trigger massive earthquakes. We're talking magnitude 9 or higher. These would trigger tsunamis that would compound the flooding problem we already have. Oh, and remember that coldness we released into the ocean? That cold, fresh water is less dense than salty ocean water, so it would float on top. This would create a layer of cold water covering the oceans, which would freeze almost immediately in a lot of places because, while the ice melted instantly, the air temperature didn't change. So we'd end up with a weird situation where we've melted all the ice, flooded the coasts, and then immediately started freezing new ice on the surface of the ocean. The good news, if you can call it that, is that some coastal cities would be protected by this new ice formation. The bad news is that the climate system would be so disrupted that we'd probably trigger a new ice age within a few years. Also, all that meltwater would change the salinity of the oceans, which would kill most marine life that can't adapt quickly. The fishing industry would collapse. Ocean ecosystems would be decimated. Humanity would survive, probably. We're resilient, but we'd be starting over from scratch in terms of civilization. Every port city, every coastal trade route, every naval base, all of it would be useless. We'd have to rebuild everything on higher ground. So if you're planning to melt all the ice on Earth instantly, maybe don't do that. Just a thought.